Thank you, James. You're too kind. And thank you to Engineers Without Borders for inviting me here today. I say, as we say in East Africa, asante sana. Thank you very much. When I first got this invitation to Engineers Without Borders, I must admit we went back and forth with James a little bit. I was under the impression that I'll be addressing a room full of individuals in dark suits, in white shirts and ties. And I really didn't feel up to the task. And then I did a bit of reading and I said, okay, this is my kind of group. And just listening to George Roder, Jennifer Hiskoff, and Josh, and what they've just said about the spirit that imbues development. That's what I'm going to be talking about. So I feel they've rather stolen my thunder. I'd really prepared a nice little anecdote to start with, but I think theirs are much better than mine. As we speak right now, the people of South Sudan are voting whether to secede from the north or not. And when one looks at the statistics, it may seem irrational. And I've seen a lot of articles written, particularly in the past week, saying, well, are we seeing the birth of another failed state in Africa? The majority of these 8 million people live under $1 a day. You have a literacy rate of 15%. You have a population that has been traumatized by over 21 years of civil war. And yet, when one listens to the people of South Sudan, and we've in Kenya been host to tens of thousands of them over the past 2 or 3 decades, and the peace agreement that led to the vote that's going on now was signed in Kenya in 2005. When one meets them, the excitement is palpable that they're going to be free, that they're defining their own reality for the first time. It's not a neat reality, it's not an easy reality, it's going to be extremely difficult, but it's theirs. In the ballots, you vote yes for unity, and the sign is this. So you put your tick next to this. And if you're saying no to unity, to secede, it's one hand like this. And meeting South Sudanese friends the Sunday before I came here in Nairobi, because they were voting in Nairobi at a place near a venue where we were holding a meeting, I was impressed that the South Sudanese friends wouldn't shake hands. You stick your hand out and they would hold back, and everyone was doing a high five. And it told me something about what development means. That a very particular history of oppression, racism, and what we call in Swahili, madharau, to despise, to look down upon, has informed the way an entire population thinks of themselves, of their nationhood, and what development means to them. And this causes me to make the argument that dignity comes before development. So dignity first, then development. In highly heterogeneous fledgling nations, traumatized by conflict and occupation, and sometimes cursed by wealth, development means listening first. It's software first, hardware second. I said, in a country like my own, Kenya, Ivory Coast was similar to Kenya 10 or 15 years ago. Developed country, stable, prosperous, and seen as a bastion of development in its sub-region. Yet, governance failures led to a meltdown that I would describe as a software failure. It's like having a brand new Dell computer, and you're all engineers, so you can relate to this. It's a brand new computer with MS-DOS software. It'll crash. The blue screen of death occasionally shows up on countries. And that's what happened to Kenya in 2007. It's happened to Ivory Coast. It's going to happen in a few other African countries over the coming 5-6 years, because we're going through a very important transition that will be volatile, but I think is pregnant with tremendous possibility. The Kenyan experience was unique. We had all the hardware right. In the 5 years to the violence that James talked about in 2007, 2008, the stock exchange had grown by 400%. The economy had grown at an average of 5.5% per year. Within 3 months of coming to power in 2003, 1.3 million children went to school for the first time who had never been to school, primary school. By 2006, the number of primary school children who were enrolled in primary school had doubled from 2003. These are major developments. We had a housing boom underway, an infrastructure boom, and yet we had the meltdown that we saw in 2007 in Kenya. I describe it to people as a software failure, and often we focus too much on the software, too much on the hardware, and not enough on the software. I'll give you a small anecdote about an old man. When I returned to Kenya in 2008, I spent 1 year traveling around the country, living in villages with ordinary people, listening to them, just listening to their perspective of what was happening in the country and what they felt about the country, about Kenya and their place in it. And I was struck by one old man who said, "Let me tell you that in this region where we live, even if the government tarmacked all the roads, brought water to every house, medicines to every hospital, we would never vote for it." And that took me aback. And again, it emphasized to me the importance of these software issues, the nationhood issues that often we put to the background and assume that a country can grow itself out of its software problems, that growth alone can solve issues of ethnic polarization and other divisions that may afflict societies, whether it's in Sudan or in Kenya or wherever it is. This means that ethnic polarization, regional, religious divisions can cause people to vote against, quote unquote, development. Because one has to ask a question, which I think was where George, Jennifer, and Josh were coming from. Does development affirm one's humanity, especially in highly heterogeneous contexts? Is it inclusive regionally, ethnically, religiously, by sex? These are important questions that one must ask before one engages with any situation. It means, from the African perspective, development is often measured by the successes and failures of the development industry, and one has to face up to the fact that the development or aid industry has become just that, an industry. And if it was a potato chip factory in Africa, it would have spent hundreds of billions of dollars on what would seem to be not that many chips and not that edible in many places. The development of orthodoxies has not delivered, whether you speak of modernization theories, human capital and basic needs theories, the neoclassical Washington consensus that ended in 2004, and new notions of citizen agency. As I said, when I spent a year traveling around Kenya, I was struck by the angst, in spite of the development, by the heightened volatility and polarization. In the end, as I said, development dignifies people in their circumstances. So the most successful development I have seen in terms of both the software and hardware is done by people who do what you, as Engineers Without Borders, do. They're volunteers. That spirit, be they engineers, be they journalists, you communicate a spirit, a communal sense of progress that transcends the tarmac of roads, the concrete of skyscrapers. That's why it's great to see that I was reading 900 volunteers made this conference possible. Even bringing difficult travelers like me here. So I'll say thank you, and thank you again. It's this spirit that comes first before one talks about development. And we are learning this the hard way from the lessons of projects across the continent of Africa. It's spirit first, development second, dignity before development. I'll finalize with two realities. I call them the realities of the perfect storm for development that can be taken advantage of and should be taken advantage of, but also pose certain risks. First of all, mobile technology, FM radio technology, social networking has exploded across Africa. In 2007, I remember addressing a group where the figure that I had managed to pull out of some report by either the World Bank or the UN was mobile telephony penetration of about 25% for Africa. In Kenya recently, when they did a survey on the matter, we found that the penetration in terms of just numbers of mobile phones that people have out there would go up to 50%. And you can imagine what that means in terms of the transfer of information, of ideas, of aspirations, and the globalization, especially of the youth. And I don't mean to be unkind to my friends from Canada and North America. I find that we're able to do things in Africa with our mobile phones that you can't do in Canada. You can't do in the US. You know? I can send money to my grandmother from here on my mobile phone straight into her phone. She can take that and she can go to the market with those credits and buy tomatoes with that. She can trade on the stock exchange with that. She can get prices of tomatoes on that same phone. There's stuff happening in Africa that is allowing us to leap from the third world to the first. But it's happening in a manner that is, as all development is, rather messy, rather chaotic. It's very confusing for the development aid industry because it doesn't fit into a log frame. It's very hard to come up with objective, verifiable indicators. And you know the lingo. It's very difficult to come up with these. But I believe this is what development really looks like. And I think that the structure and the spirit that is communicated by this group expresses an understanding of this reality. So this is a powerful reality. It connects people to people. It's new, it's a bit crazy, it's unpredictable, but it is the future. Even I have a Twitter account. I'm very proud of that. I don't know how to use it. Somebody in my office says, but I'm very proud of having a Twitter account. This is important, and it goes back to development and the software-hardware argument. The fact that we have these social networking technologies now that are able to connect people around the world, person to person, in a way that is unprecedented in human history that this is possible. That I'm able to get messages from people in India, in Brazil, asking questions about what's going on in Kenya. That for me is extremely moving. And I can write to somebody and ask what's happening with the floods that I'm reading about in Brazil. There's another harder reality. Since the beginning of the 21st century, when one considers the African diaspora here in the West, and Africans trained in the West who have returned home and now work in private sector, in civil society, and in government. And this is my argument. I would like to be proven wrong. I might be completely wrong. This is my own observation. We now have a critical mass of Africans who understand you in the West. We know you better than you know us. When there is the aid mission arriving from Canada to the Ministry of Finance of Ghana, of Kenya, they know what to say. They know what kind of template of report will keep CEDA happy. They can churn it out in 2 minutes. That's not a problem. There's a critical mass there, and I'm being a bit cynical in saying that, but I think this is an opportunity that should be used. At the same time, one has to look at the fact that Africa is re-establishing relationships, particularly our side of Africa, on the East Coast. We are re-establishing relationships with the Far East, with China, with India, with the Gulf, that go back to the 12th century. And this is changing what development means and what governance means in our context. And I think it holds great promise and risks as well. I've talked about technology and where it's moving in Africa. I want to talk about one other issue that combined could create for this perfect storm of development that is going to push Africa into the next millennium as a leading region of development. And that's the fact that we have a massive youth bulge across Africa. And I'll give the example of Kenya. 78.4% of our population is below the age of 34. 80% of them are employed in the so-called informal sector. That's in 2006. Only 20% of them in the formal sector, in banks and the other. But most of them are informal sector. Informal sector means you're a farmer, you're struggling, you're hustling, to survive. You try to use your wits to get about it. In 1986, 80% of employment was in the formal sector. By 2006, it had flipped the other way around. This change is seismic. It has major implications for the way development is going to take place in Africa, because it is youthful, and this youth is informed, interconnected, in many places confident, and information makes their aspirations global and their expectations of government global as well. Look at Tunisia recently, where we had some demonstrations. Government with a very tight grip on its political situation says that X number of people have died in these demonstrations. YouTube says different immediately. So we are living in a very different world. I'll conclude with a bit of caution, but pregnant in it or contained in it is, for me, a very hopeful message, a very hopeful note. 2 months ago, in a part of Kenya which has always been known for being very tranquil and has never been caught up in a lot of the political violence one reads about in Kenya every 5 years, an area called Taita. Young people from that region got together and decided that they were going to demonstrate, because the government had been promising for 20 years to repair the road which goes from Taita to Tanzania. The Tanzanians had done their job, they'd built the road up to the Kenyan border, but the Kenyan side had never been really made up, repaired. Yet money had been allocated, but money sometimes takes a walk into pockets sometimes. But so the local community, we recently promulgated a new constitution in Kenya, by the way, August of last year. We're very excited about it. It's going to be a struggle, but we're very excited about it. It's going to be blood and guts to make it work, but we're willing to make it happen. And the ordinary people of Taita said, we're going to have a peaceful demonstration so the government can repair the road. And they blocked the road. Now they blocked the main trunk road that goes from the coast, Mombasa, to Nairobi, to Uganda, to Rwanda, to Burundi, to Eastern Congo for 48 hours. And when the government tried to find out who organized this, they couldn't find out. They couldn't figure it out. businessmen, farmers were bringing water and food to the demonstrators. And it was a very unique expression by ordinary people rising up and saying, we're going to fix this road. The local, call him a governor, I think that's what it would be in the Canadian context, arrived, and the people said, no, we don't want you to address us. They put him in a little taxi and drove him up the bumpy road and told him to drive back up. And he was so shaken up, he drove right back to his headquarters. I was there about 3 weeks ago, over Christmas actually, just the other day. And it's wonderful to see, even over Christmas, the government is working extremely hard to repair this road after 20 years. And when I talk to, I can see my time is up, but it was talking to ordinary people in the villages and sitting with them, men, women, youth, and they were saying, you know something, we're very proud of what we did this time. Look, they're repairing the road. And also, the president of Uganda knows that we exist now. We're a small group of people here, but he knows that we are there because his petrol was stuck for 48 hours. The president of Rwanda had to pick up the phone and ask what's going on. The president of Congo knows who we are. The president of Tanzania now knows who we are. And it was a pride that that infected me at the time. The cautionary tale I'll give is with regard to corruption. That corruption undoes everything. And poverty is not the key challenge in many African contexts. It's not poverty, it's inequality. Inequality that is easily regionalized, ethnicized, it creates polarization, and it's easily militarized. We're seeing that in Ivory Coast, we've seen that in Kenya, we're seeing that in Nigeria, and it comes out of the inequalities that come out of corruption and the conspicuous consumption that accompanies it. In those contexts, you can ask a question, you say, well, but the economy is growing, and people will ask you, the economy is growing for who? Usually growing only for a tiny minority. It is especially bad in countries that have mineral resources. I always get in trouble for saying, I thank God Kenya hasn't found oil. It's really a blessing that we haven't found oil. I'll stop there and say thank you for inviting me here to share. Dignity becomes before development, and the software is as important as the hardware. It's been a real honor to come and speak before the Engineers Without Borders. I really feel your spirit, and you've made my job very easy. And I was very pleased to see that I wasn't addressing a group of people in black suits and ties. It would have been a lot more difficult. I'm really happy to be here and hoping to share over the next couple of days. Thank you very much.